Hi! Golden Crown Kinglets are the subject of this small 7 by 10 inch watercolor. I got the reference photos for these guys last fall from our kitchen window. I started the painting by frisketing off the birds and the foreground elements. And I pre-mixed a bunch of colors that I was going to be using for my background. I had some blues and some greens of different colors, and I put those on dry paper. And I worked from the top of the page to the bottom. As I went down, I let gravity pull the pigment down so I got a nice smooth edge. As I got toward the bottom of the page, I wanted to have that approach the foreground. So I started using a smaller brush, and I kind of dabbled in some other colors as it's set up on the page. This would mimic the branches and the leaves of the foreground elements fading into the background. And then I started putting in some greens that would cause backruns into that background. Kind of have some sharp edges that appeared. And here I am using a number 2 brush, kind of just faking in some branches that would mimic the motion of the ones in the foreground. And this is on somewhat wet paper. It's starting to dry up, but I keep putting more layers on, so it's slowly drying as it goes across. Here I hit it with the hairdryer in between things so it would set up the paints. And here I'm faking in a couple more of those branches that will go into the background. Once I was happy with that background, I started peeling off the frisket and then transferred the rest of my sketch onto the page using tracing paper. My goal at this point, as always, was cover up as much of that paper as I could. I like moving around the page and not leaving anything white. The sooner I can get all those elements with the lightest local colors, then I can start balancing colors off each other. Most of the painting from here out was done with the sharp number 2 brush. And the background elements were mostly cool colors. I had blues and greens, and they're varying from lights to darks. And in the process of composing this, it's difficult to do 2 birds. And often you want to have a male and a female bird, or a pair of birds, because that makes that's kind of how they often come, and it makes them for a pretty picture. And I don't know if that's a social commentary or something, but it's nice to have this pair of birds. But artistically, that can be a complicated thing to do, because you usually ping pong between the 2 objects, the 2 main objects in the painting. And in art school, they talk about the dumbbell compositions like this, which have 2 main features. And that is kind of a deadly thing. But what I always try to do if I'm doing a pair of birds is try to compose it in such a way that there are other elements on the page. So it isn't just the 2 birds. You've got the foliage and these branches that then become tertiary elements that give your eye other places to investigate. So it isn't just the 2 birds. You've got your eye being led around by the branches of the lower bird, carrying up into the wing of the top bird, and some of the branches and the leaves of the top branch bringing your eye back down into the picture. So that's a way that you can avoid some of the complications of the dumbbell thing, where you're just looking at 2 different things the whole time on the painting. So composing this was kind of tricky. I had a bunch of photos. You can see some of the reference shots on the left. Those were photos I got from a bird banding place where the birds were in somebody's hand, and you could get super detailed macro shots of the birds. And the other shots I have, you can kind of see above, and those were ones taken from the backyard. And so none of these birds existed in the same place, so you're kind of compositing them and figuring out a composition that will work, hopefully work, to make for something interesting. And you can see the bird's wing of the photo above, and that has a very green background. In doing this, I wanted to set up more contrast between the birds and the background. So I had the top bird against blue, where its wing's out and has some of the dark colors of the wing. And then the bottom bird, where it's a lot of belly, I had some of the dark tones to kind of show some more contrast with those. The birds themselves, like most birds, they kind of disappear into the woods. They don't want to be eaten by hawks, so they often are kind of hard to see against their backgrounds, which is good for them, but that can make paintings kind of dull if the bird's hard to see all the time. So it's a challenge to make the bird look realistic while having it still show up well in a photo. So I'll often try to manipulate these so the environment is still this greenish kind of natural looking place, but the birds kind of have some pop against the background. The hawks would love that because they'd be easy to find, but it exists in the painting, so that's okay. There's no hawk in there to give them any trouble. And you can see that I spare a lot of the detail to later in the painting. I don't put in eyes first and little feet details. I usually try to get the biggest parts of the birds done, or the full background and foreground. I always go for the biggest parts first and then work to those little details. If I've seen people who, will start with the eye and work their way out from the rest of the painting, and that's great, that works for them. The problem with that is that I think you're always starting with dessert. That's that's the most fun, and you're doing that first, so then you have less interest to put all the little details into the background and the branches. So I find for having a painting come together cohesively and have a lot of detail and places to explore, for me, it works better to build the whole painting together, work a little here and a little there, and bring the painting as a whole to completion. These are tiny little birds. They're just so hard to get a good photograph of these guys, partly because they're so small, partly because they disappear into the background, and they're usually in foliage going behind leaves and behind branches, and then they move like at the speed of an electron. So trying to get a photo of them that's good to paint from is really difficult. So for these, my shots were okay. They're usually really small in the frame, and some of them are a little blurry, but I'm able to get the detail out of them that I needed to do the painting. And my photos were from the fall, and I chose to paint this as the springtime scene, partly because it's spring here, and I'm seeing golden-crowned kinglets when I go out walking the dog, and so I'm kind of in that mode now, so I decided to change it to that season. But we get a lot as they migrate through it in the spring and in the fall. Right now they're pretty abundant. Just cutest little guys imaginable. And I'd looked through my notes, and the last time I painted these was 29 years ago. So it's been a long time since I've had a chance to paint these guys, and boy, it was fun to get back to them. They're just so much fun. So here are a couple, since these birds are so small and the painting's so small, I'll put in a couple of detail shots of these guys. And you can see, here's the one in flight. And there's just a tremendous amount of detail and just beautiful, subtle colors on these guys to paint and render. And the other guy here on the bottom with his wings in his usual position, this guy was a challenge because he had all these subtle greens kind of rounding out the body, and kind of these reflected colors coming up on the belly to make it look realistic. And that was a challenge to paint, but a really rewarding challenge. Well, thanks for watching. If you have a chance, have a peek at the blog and the website to learn more about this painting and other ones. And we'd love to hear from you, so if you have a chance, leave a comment.